Hi, everyone. So excited to be here with our quintet today. Our word of the day is encourage. And hopefully we'll continue to encourage the viewers here as well as ourselves with ourselves. And to start it off, I always kind of lean on Dave. So Dave, you're always a good uplifter.
I don't have anything as profound as I have the last couple of weeks, maybe, but when I first saw the word encourage, it took me back to leadership days in the Navy and in corporate world. I should just say leadership as a whole. And it's how we treat people to move them beyond where they think they can be or get to and push them further. We encourage them, if you will. We push them, we pull them, we lead them to greater heights than what they thought they were capable of. And nothing too profound there, but encourage also drives me to the point of people need to recognize when people are encouraging them, maybe the encourager is doing it because they're missing something in their own lives. There's something that they need to see from you that they can live vicariously, if you will. So there's two sides to it. The encourager may be doing it for the most noble of reasons and because they want to see something affected that they weren't able to, if you will.
Yeah, great start, Dave. I always get a little trepidatious when you do, but I know we always come through. So good way to start. Jason?
Yeah, great start and glad to be here with everyone. I'm not doing every week right now, so it is exciting to be back and with such a full house. So that's wonderful to be here. I love it. I love the word, and it's to encourage, to give courage, and we can do obviously a whole show on courage, but we're not. So the thing is to piggyback off of what Dave was saying is that, and then to add is that, it's about what already exists within the person. It's not about giving them something new, but awakening what's already inside. And to Dave's point about, yeah, definitely the leader also feeds back, like when I see clients, I'm doing therapy with myself too. So we all, that is that mutual thing that we do get out of it, especially from encouragement, because if someone's excited, it's contagious and you get excited too. So it is a win-win on both sides. But yeah, my first point is definitely it's about awakening something that's already within them and letting them see that.
Excellent. Catherine?
Oh, it's so fun because, of course, I love encouragement. And so I first thought of Carol Dweck and her work on growth mindset, right? And that is just so beautiful. I would encourage people to take a look at that if they're not familiar with it, because the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset makes a world of difference in how a person experiences and enjoys, their life experience, right? And so, yeah, I think it's fabulous. And I also think that when you look at just not only the word, it makes you light up already because it runs at a higher vibration. And that's really what we want. We want to be working on higher vibrations. And when we encourage someone or encourage ourselves, then we automatically raise our vibration a little bit. And so that is going to have a snowball effect, right? And get into the higher vibrational cycle. And how fun is that?
That's a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing, Catherine. It's Charles's turn.
Yeah, I'm very encouraged by the word encouraged, John, and everybody else. I think this is really, really important. It's something for all leaders and managers to bear in mind. First of all, I think encouragement is like fuel for the soul, and it really provides a necessary motivation and flow, I guess you might call it, when you're sort of in that energy flow, to really keep going, especially when you're facing difficulties or uncertainty. And a kind gesture or a kind word can really reignite someone's motivation and their self-esteem, their self-confidence, reminding them of their worth and their potential. And it's just really, really a critical thing. It's something that I think managers and leaders in corporations often lose sight of and they forget about. The other thing I'm reminded of is the saying, we rise by lifting others. And I think one of the ways we lift others, and one of the key ways we lift others, is through encouragement.
Yeah, I think we've all started with a really good beginning. And, encouragement really lends itself to positivity, so you can change, like Catherine said, the vibration, the mood, the energy, and the, optimism that one can share with others for others. So it's about creating a model or an example and leveraging that with someone who can actually take advantage of it or is in a prime position. A lot of people are pivoting, and that pivot takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of commitment. And it's always easier and better when someone starts with, hey, you're going to make it. I know it. I'm so sure. That transfers, right? No different. Someone says, watch out, be careful, do all these things. You're going to be a little bit more, let's say, restrained and maybe more doubtful. And I think fear and doubt have an opportunity to fill in when encouragement isn't there, or the opposite when you're into discouragement. And you can see how things can really drop off. Dave?
Yeah, I want to start with saying thank you, Catherine, for bringing up Carol Dweck. I've already put in my list of books I have to add now is some of hers. But I'm glad you brought up growth mindset, because I think that ties very, very, very closely with what we're talking about. As I've watched friends of mine and my own journey through training and how we said, oh, we can't. Well, somebody came in and encouraged us with the right word of, well, how are you going to grow if you keep canting? Well, let's move on. And it was a guy named David Williams, who I met through LinkedIn, and Joy McAdams, who really have shown me that, look, if we can get beyond our perceived limitations, then we can grow into the next level that we're meant to be at. And it's a team effort. And I appreciate your mentioning vibrations, Catherine, because for me, exercise is a mind-altering event. I can go into it with the worst mood ever, and I can run even just a mile, walk like a couple miles like I did today, and I come out with a better vibration. I'm a little bit happier. Whether it lasts all day or not, I don't know. But that reflection that I have, where I'm now smiling at somebody who's just walking by instead of being in a grumpy mood, that's encouraging to them, because again, we don't know what's going on with somebody internally outside of us that if we don't have a personal relationship with, especially. So I always go back to Robin Williams as Patch Adams and making people smile and having that long lasting effect of just popping out of the tree and smiling at them and startling them, but they smile, and that transfers and moves on and pays forward later on.
That's perfect. Thanks so much, Dave. Jason?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about, mindset and how you envision it. One of the things, and we touched on this, and I think Don touched on it already, is that, I jotted down some notes, kind of getting my stuff together for today and thinking about, where the conversation could go. And it's always fun to see where it does go. But, helping people see that change and growth is possible. That's that mindset. That's that whatever, and working with people, it's like, has there ever been a time in your life when you saw that something that you couldn't do and you actually accomplished it? And they might say, well, no, because sometimes we get down on ourselves, and they need that, they need to be encouraged, and say, well, did you ever not know how to walk and you learned how to walk? It's pretty major. Did you learn how to talk? Did you learn how to read? Just going back to the very beginning and say, that, and then through our lives, we've accomplished things, whatever it is, graduating from middle school, graduating high school, so on and so forth, military, college, whatever it is. But we're so hard on ourselves because we're always looking for what we can't do. Not all of us, but that is a mindset, that negativity. Well, I can't do this because, Dave was just talking about can'ts. But allowing and opening up the door for people to see, oh, I can do this, and I've already done it, and so much more. And once you shift that mindset, change the vibration, which is so true. Thank you, Catherine. It changes your world. change your mind, change your world. And I think that's the key to being a good encourager, is to help someone to do that.
Yeah, sounds great. Looks like we're on a roll. Catherine?
Well, what is so fun sometimes also is to encourage someone to look at the situation or what's happening from a different point of view, a different perspective, right? And when we've spoken about perspective before, and I think that makes such a difference in how people tend to begin to think moving forward as well. And when you can help someone really start to encourage themselves, then that is a fabulous place to be.
So true. Charles?
Yeah, I think that's great, and that's one thing that this might be a bit controversial, but there's a lot of talk these days about well-being, and and I would say that in my previous role, that was not that long ago, well-being was really, really critical. And when people participated in various well-being activities, whether that was mental health first aid or other things, on-site things that we ran in the company, they were encouraged by that. But then there's another avenue, and I think that comes from this notion of encouraging ourselves, and that is starting to build a muscle of resilience. Because there are people who are out there in the LinkedIn verse who are saying we're talking too much about well-being, and we should be focusing more on helping people build up their resilience and recognizing that there's always going to be good days and bad days, and that's part of life. And but regardless of all that, I think that the power of encouragement, it's like you were saying, Dawn, about discouragement. So if you say discouraging things to people, you wash away their resilience. If you say encouraging things to people, you help them to build up their resilience. And it's just so devastating when people hear discouraging comments. There's so many stories, there's so many Hollywood movies about that, and how people have overcome odds and have a unfortunate childhood. Lots of stories like that. But I think that this is really, really important, this whole concept of being able to encourage ourselves, having that muscle of resilience inside ourselves to build ourselves up. Also important to be in community and to get that encouragement from community, but being able to have that muscle inside is important.
Yeah, I was going to touch on the same thing, which was self-encouragement, because everything starts with you. And why not encourage yourself, with affirmations, in order to manifest things, Charles's point, good days, bad days, you have to give yourself some room. You have to give yourself some time, and you got to give yourself some grace. And you have to forgive yourself first when things aren't going right, or look ahead, right? If the present situation isn't that strong, maybe there's something in the future. I think it's hope that drives people to continue when everything around them and everybody around them says stop, or you can't do it. And I agree, when you're young, you're very sensitive and impressionable. And when someone tells you something, even with good intention, it may come across as, something you accept as a belief. I'm not very smart. I'm not very strong. I'll never be very tall. I mean, whatever that is. And a lot of families do that to kids and fellow family members. They think they're encouraging them when they say, well, you got a B+, you're too smart not to get an A, right? And it's a backhanded compliment in a sense. And, a lot of people don't realize what affects them affects people like them. So when someone tells you something that really is, a downer, that makes a difference. So words matter, and especially words without understanding or context. Too many people play Wheel of Fortune with people where they try to guess the puzzle before they get enough clues, and they end up not doing it as well as if they would be more interested in understanding. You know, everybody knows the what, usually. They don't always know the why. And they don't understand what to do from there. But some people feel obligated to dispense advice at the first drop of a pin. And a lot of times it would have been better served to take one's time and get to know the situation and continue the situation. People don't get into issues overnight, and they typically won't get out of them overnight. But you need to give someone a stepping stone. And I think that's important. And I think that's what a show like the Hour of Empower and what we do for each other and with each other that encourages people we'll never see, never even appreciate. I mean, the highest gratification is somebody that you might have touched earlier in your career or life, and they come back and say, because of what you told me or shared with me or the book you offered me, it changed my world. And now you feel, hey, there was value. Dave?
Wow, it's hard to follow up, but I want to build on what Charles said with a quick background history, not even history, but anecdote. Is last year I had shared a post on LinkedIn that my father had lost a friend to suicide, childhood friend he'd known for 50, 60 years, and I had now let me caveat that with, as you guys all well know, for the listeners, I post on mental health issues. I've had to deal with my own. I encourage people to get beyond them and get the help they need and do what they can and talk to people. And it was very frustrating when an old shipmate of mine came right back almost immediately with, well, if we would stop talking about suicide, maybe it would go away. And I just absolutely had to second guess I said, this was a retired captain, an old shipmate who I considered a friend, and I just absolutely could not understand where he was coming from. So I took relatively a year off from posting anything about mental health, especially about suicide. And I said, so the beginning of this, May, we're coming up the end of Mental Health Awareness Month. And at the beginning of the month, I said, you know what? A year ago, I took a year off from posting very much about this. And guess what? Not talking about it didn't solve it either.
Right.
So what's the problem? What's the harm with actually talking about mental health issues? It's encouraging if people understand that they're not the only person going through these problems.
Right.
Okay. It just baffled my mind when this guy who was a very senior leader in the U.S. Navy retired. It was years ago he retired, but just baffled me. And to Charles's point, resilience is absolutely the right answer. We have to learn to be resilient. And I think too many times we discourage our youth out of resilience a lot of times. And how do we get them back to being resilient? I don't know. I've worked on it. I failed at it a little bit with my kids. But it's absolutely right. Being resilient, and it's a trained environment maybe where they have to experience life. And too many kids these days are not experiencing life. I've mentioned here before many times, how many times do we see kids with casts these days? And again, it's not that I want people to get injured, but they're not out experiencing life and having these pains that they can learn from to become resilient. Mm-hmm. The body reacts to these things. It's just like, what's the joke of kids need to eat more dirt, to get healthier, because the germs that they can encounter and be outside in nature. As I look out in the forest behind me, not forest, but the group of trees here. I said Florida, it's not a forest. We got to get out of this mentality of, well, I can just let them watch video games and people playing video games and other videos, and just encourage them to get outside for things that are not within their normal comfort zone will help with that resiliency maybe.
Great point, Dave. Really appreciate it. Jason?
Yeah, and as we look at this through the lens of encourage, I think it's great. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because it's something that's very important to me, is that resilience. And I talk about resilience in the fact of, but at what cost? People say, oh, those kids used to be so resilient. Yeah, but what it cost? How's their mental health now? How they just, because resilient used to mean, as society saw it, not by definition, but as suck it up, be tough, rub some dirt on it. And that's not it. And, back to Charles's point, I think that It's just the opposite of what some people are saying, is that, but you need wellness to be resilient.
Yes.
You have to have that strong base. You have to have a base of what you can go back to be resilient, because life's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so if we encourage people to just suck it up and to be strong in the moment, that's grinding gears. But wellness, in this metaphor, or whatever it is, this wellness is the oil to keep the gears lubricated so they don't. The gears are still there. You're still able to bounce back. You're still able to handle it, but you're able to bounce back from a place of power and strength, not from losing. It's not a negative gain, so to speak. It's not like, well, I'm going to go and cry in my room, but I got through it. I did it. And somehow we think that's going to build that muscle to go forward, because it builds the muscles in the wrong direction, because that's going to show up in another way much later. So I think wellness and mental health is the key to being resilient. So you know how to bounce back. And it's learning those lessons early in life. You know, I know someone who's an educator. I know a bunch of educators, but I know someone who's actually a superintendent of schools, and we talk about this. It's like, now's the time that these kids learn to lose, because the stakes are much lower. So when you learn to lose, and to them, they're huge, right? Oh my God, remember your first heartbreak? You were devastated, but it was just a crush. It just was something small, and you learned from it, and you moved on, and you're dating someone else. You know, you're passing someone else notes later on. So not to belittle, not to go on with this point too much, but I think it's very important that you have that strong mental health, that wellness in place. And I will add this, just because it kind of ties in to go back to the encourage. I think about, like, right now is the time of, well, it's a little bit past because we're almost in summer coming up this next month, but in spring we're growing stuff, and I'm looking at fertilizers, and they do make like one generic fertilizer, but that's not going to get you the best results. But if you look at fertilizers, it's one for cactus and succulents. There's one for trees and fruit trees. There's one for grass. You know, there's different things that for different things, so to speak. So when we encourage people, we have to look at where they're at and what they need to encourage them. And that comes from that, also resilience. Who needs what to be the most resilient? Who needs most to be encouraged in the moment? So I think that's a very important aspect to look at.
Yeah, so true. Catherine?
Well, I think this is really a fabulous conversation. And I would add that I found, when I was in my early 20s, I had a major lumbar repair because my lumbar spine had basically crumbled. So here I am in this back brace, and I've had a marvelous repair, but I have to wear this hip to breast back brace for a year and walk at least a mile a day for a year. And I'm back in Florida, and at first I'm like, well, how could I have put myself in this position, right? I could see where other people weren't taking care of themselves, and here I am in the same boat, and I was really pretty down on myself. But I had to get going on those, mile a day, right? I had to keep moving. And this is not going to be my life. I have to keep moving. And so I started going to the beach in that hip to breast back brace and a bikini every day. And I didn't really care what I looked like. I'm this little walking skeleton in this brace, right? And the huge lesson that I learned is that we can encourage each other, right? Because I was at a point, I was just beginning to come out and do what I was doing, yet I didn't realize I was being a role model for other people that had issues going on in their life. And it got to be really pretty fun, because people would say, oh, here she comes again. How far are you going today? And so then you get to know people, and it's just like, oh, well, gosh, how are you today? Right. And so I guess what I'm going towards is we don't have to have it all figured out all the time in order to be encouraging, not only to ourselves, but to other people too.
Yeah, that is so true. I need to get rid of 1B.
No, there he is.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll move to Charles. I'll keep working, but we got the audience going.
Okay, what I wanted to add from the what I've heard from the conversation is I think it's as we encourage people, it's important that we sort of have them separate themselves from self. And it's very, particularly if people are facing discouragement or circumstances which are pulling them under and challenging their resilience. When people are dealing with failure, for example, they often identify with the failure as their own. So, they might, for example, a phrase might be, "I am my failure." Well, they're actually not their failure. And they've just had a situation that they've labeled as a failure. And then in addition to labeling it as a favor, they've actually taken on that they are that favor. And this is something I think worthwhile to note about encouragement, because people will often identify with these situations that they are their failure. And so I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because when we have a conversation about, is there something missing today in the generation around building up resilience, there is a school of thought that people have overcorrected on. I don't know if tough love is the right word. I don't want that to come across the wrong way, but that some of the ways that people have been parenting around growth mindset, and believe me, I'm a huge advocate of growth mindset, firmly believe in growth mindset, but there is a school of thought around how some people have parented around growth mindset, that they believe that that's actually eroded resilience. But either way, when we're encouraging people, we want to encourage them that they are not their failure. It's the famous story about the guy who crashes his BMW and gets out of the car and looks at the front of the BMW, and the other driver says, "Oh, you're missing your wrist." And then the guy says, "Oh, my Rolex, my Rolex." So I think that it's important that when we're encouraging people, the words are what we say is important, and that we're saying things to them that are helping them to build up their self-esteem and their confidence, and not necessarily take on discouraging things as that they are that discouraging thing, or that they are that failure. Yeah, I don't know, for whatever that's worth, that was just coming to me as I was listening to the conversation.
I think that last part you said, Charles, was absolutely brilliant. Quite frankly, I mean, getting beyond what the perceived. Let me just. I'm mumbling here for a little bit, because this one's hitting a little bit too close to home today. Because I have a lot of folks who try to encourage me, and I keep going back to, well, I had this or I had that, and they have to pull me out of that. My therapist for years tried to pull me out of that. So it's Charles, what you're saying is absolutely brilliant and spot on. So
thank you.
We'll just leave with one last thing here before we move on to Jason. Is I did some quick search on quotes, because we haven't been able to see the text, but two that hit me were, "Don't let what you cannot do interfere with what you can do," unknown. But then we got to go back to old Dr. Seuss. You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can still steer yourself any direction you choose. So just leave with that and go to Jason. Oh, Don's back.
Yeah. He looks like he's frozen.
I'll move to Jason.
Yeah.
Great points, and I love what you're saying, Charles. And I think you're alluding to the everyone gets a trophy mentality, and I think that definitely took us in the wrong direction. We saw the results of that, and it was a overcorrection for sure. And we're paying the price for that as a society now. And I'm not talking about get off my lawn, you darn kids, because I'm not that old, but I am Gen X, and I was part of that. We rubbed some dirt on a generations after they try to course correct, and we went the wrong direction. And I think it's very valid in this conversation, because like you said about encouraging people, being aware of what you're doing. If you're trying to encourage somebody and you're like, "It's okay, it's all right," and you're coddling them, is that what's best for their growth? And some people that might need a softer hand, some people might need a firmer hand. Say, "Hey, you lost, what did we learn from it? And let's move on." And each person is different. Even when people ask me for advice, because that's kind of, they know what I do, and I'm like, well, it depends on relationships. It depends on who the person is. It depends on a lot of things. There's not a one blank answer. There's not one just, oh, fill in the blanks, put in their name, and then say this after it. That's not the reality. And so encouragement is very personal. And with that said, I think that's the point we've been touching on, is about that person and not being their problem, not being their issue, stuff like that. But one way we can encourage people is to help them remember who they truly are and aligning with their deeper purpose. Yeah. So all these circumstances that come around, all these things that happen in our lives, they're tough. Life's not easy. No one promised this life was going to be easy. If it was easy, it would be sitting somewhere doing nothing. And that's not much of a life at all. So, growth can be challenging. Growth can be, that there's friction in growth because you're changing. And that's something we have to realize.
This is why you were a Marine. Nobody promised you a rose garden.
Exactly. I didn't show up looking for one. It wasn't there. But yeah, finding out, aligning with your purposes and aligning who you truly are and recognizing that. And that's part of when you encourage somebody, is really letting them get back to that, to Dave's point. If he doesn't feel it, if he can't see it, it's not going to work. People they have the best intentions and they're trying to support you and they're trying to help you. And if they're not doing it in a way that you can hear it, it's all for naught. And it might be detrimental, because you might then be like, well, I don't want to hear from anybody because no one seems, and I'm not saying you are, but that is a possibility. And so the reality is that we have to have kind of a soft hand on how we help people. And there's times you have to kick people in the butt. Trust me, we just talked about being a Marine. I know all about that. I know about those times when you have to have get up there and get out there and let's move. If you fall into what we call dorsal vagal, if you shut down and you're just like, well, you might need a kick in the pants in a loving way, not in a physical way, but in a loving way to get out there. And you could help people see, no, you are amazing inside. And we just have to find the way for you to connect to that and then help people move forward.
Great points, Jason. Looks like we've got comments. We've got Carrie here. Nice to see you, Carrie. Joke of the day is, when paper clips retire, they really unwind. Okay, I like that. And we've got Charles. We rise by lifting others, and one of the best ways to lift others is through encouragement. So true. And remember, every step you take matters. Yes, you can achieve your goals. Keep believing in yourself. So true. Back to Catherine.
Well, I loved what you brought up, Charles, because I think it's imperative to be careful how we label ourselves and how we label other people, because labels can be so damaging. And I agree with you that the failure isn't necessarily my failure, or your failure isn't your failure. It's the circumstance, right? And I also think it's important for people in regard to health issues and health, how they deal with their own health, is to not identify with some of the labels that they're given as a diagnosis, right? Because that just perpetuates it. And you just are, like my diabetes. I don't happen to have diabetes, but I hear probably the majority of the people that I have worked with, they call it my diabetes, or my heart problem, or whatever it is. And when you can look at it as the body is experiencing this issue, and what can I do to encourage it, right? To make a change, right? And to work with it that way and not keep labeling it, it makes a huge difference. And the recovery time and the reversal time of some of these things is like, it's amazingly quick.
Great point. Really appreciate Catherine. Charles?
I think that Catherine and Dave and Jason and Don, this was my point around well-being, is that we don't engage in the well-being discussion to a point where people just start quickly labeling themselves as being unwell, and that conversation compromises their ability to create resilience. And I think that this is something that lately Gary Vee has been onto it, and this is what he meant by the good days and the bad days. Just because you have bad days does not mean you're unwell. But I agree, we should not stop. I totally support. We should not stop talking about well-being. And the other thing I want to just to make a note of, that there's a huge amount of statistics out there from Gallup and companies like that about how much encouragement and recognition impacts people at work. 83.6% say that when they receive recognition, it impacts their motivation at work. And employee engagement just goes through the roof when managers actually take time to encourage staff and to give them positive feedback and encouraging feedback. And there was one statistic I saw where praise from the manager was the number one thing that employees said motivated them. And so you don't have to, obviously, these statistics come from organizations, but they would apply through all of life in general. So if it's impacting people at work, it's going to impact them everywhere, if not even more so, because a parent or a loved one or a best friend is probably going to have much more of an impact than a manager is, depending on the relationship.
So many great points. And, a study I saw was that children, by the time they reach 5, have heard 25,000 no's and 5,000 yeses. And there's ways of saying yes and still teaching, like, oh, it was so nice of you not to touch the stove. Instead of get away from that stove, you're going to get burned, right? Because not only do you get direction, you get consequences of hypothetical things. And pretty soon you decide, I'm going to avoid this and I'm going to avoid that and I'm going to hide from this. And after a while, you lose yourself because of what other people might have said to you. And it takes some discipline to be encouraging. I made a promise when my grandkids showed up that I would never say anything negative about them to them. And I've kind of kept that. I didn't make it Pollyannish, but I just said, I'd never say, hey, that's dumb, of you to do that. I remember one time my daughter, I got so upset with her one time, and she was only like 12 or 13. And I came up with something and I stopped myself and I said, well, you got cornflakes for brains. I could have used something else. And she actually picked up on that and kept using it, and it was just a substitute for what I really normally might have said. And I felt proud of myself because maybe I didn't want to take responsibility for unknowingly discouraging somebody or saying something at the wrong time in the wrong context and be misinterpreted. And, you're only with people so long, whether it's the time you're with them today or the time you're with them in life. How do you want to leave them? And you want to leave people happier than you found them. You want to feel like you're somebody they look forward to seeing again because you treated them so well. And to Charles's point, everything I've seen, when I had my business, was recognition was the key factor in making employees.
Well, there he goes again.
I'm off. No,
There it is. You're in and out. I think he's out. Anyway, I think it's my turn up, and I will just share two things real quick. I really appreciate my father for never having said any negative things to me outright, like you're silly. I'll just go with this one story where he did, and I'll never forget it. I was 18 years old. A friend of mine had dared me to get an earring on a Saturday night, so I did. And he just stood at the bottom of the stairs, looked at me in the living room and said, I'm not going to be critical, Dave. That was dumb. And he walked away, and he never said another bad thing about it. He never brought it up, and he's never called me dumb or said anything I've done is dumb since then, ever since. I'll leave that story aside. But to Charles and to Don's points with recognition, I think we've mentioned a couple of times in the last few sessions off and on of leadership by walking around, just getting around and talking to people, getting out of the executive ivory tower, just saying hi to somebody, not in an organized, well, the commander's going to be in this office today and we got to have these talking points ready to go. And, oh, the CEO is coming down, better be ready to show our good work and our clean uniforms and all that. It's really getting down and getting to know people. That is encouragement in and of itself, because people start to see that they're not, quote, beneath these executives. There's a personal connection to what they're doing. And just asking, hey, how do you do this process? What do you do all day? That gets people engaged in talking about themselves. They're encouraged to share, and they don't feel like they're just a cog in a big machine. They're an individual that has an impact on the bigger picture. So I'm a big proponent, after having read many years ago. I just forgot the name of the book. There's a great book, came out in the 80s, but it's Management by Walking Around. I just tweak it to Leadership by Walking Around, and the impact that will have on individuals is immeasurable.
Was that In Search of Excellence? They were a big proponent of that.
Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
Fantastic business book. One of the best ever.
I don't know why it popped in and popped out of my head. Anyway, Jason's up.
Yeah, something we're talking about, and we've touched on it today, is about, we're talking about encourage people and encouragement, and as an act, as a physical act of encouraging somebody or to encourage, but we encourage with our actions all the time, good ways and bad ways. Catherine was sharing about going out on the beach and in her brace and stuff, and people were encouraged to see that. People that maybe they were, oh, my knees hurts a little bit, and they're like, wait a minute, this person's out here in a full brace, out here getting it done. Maybe my knee's not so bad, as a simple thing. And something I wanted to share a story. The other day, my wife and I, or actually it was just me. I went to pick up some food, and I was in our local little restaurant. I live in a little tiny community. To make this story even more impactful, I live in a community of 7,000 people, and there's only a few restaurants, great restaurants, but only a few of them. So I was in there. We were waiting for food, and this very young girl, she was probably 16, maybe 17, came in, and she wanted to talk to the manager. Okay, so this is probably a staff outside of the kitchen staff. On the floor, there's probably 4 people, maybe, not real busy. They're busy, but they turn them. Anyway, she wanted to turn in an application for work. And the person that was working the front counter went back, was gone a while, came back and said, oh, the manager, she said that we're not hiring right now, but, blah, 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 and kind of dismissed her. And I was like, you just missed a huge opportunity,
Right.
To encourage, to use our word, this young person who's looking for a job. She's out there trying to get employment. She's out there. She wants to be professional. She wants to meet the manager. She wants to do the right thing. And you've just poo-pooed her. You've just, encouraged her in the wrong direction. Oh, why even bother? Why even try? I'll just email it in, And use me an example. I was in retail leadership for a lot of years. I had staffs of up to over 100 people. I ran buildings up to 60,000 square feet. I ran big boxes. And if I could, I would come out and take every application when someone turned it in. And I would get 100 a week sometimes in the booming time. And I always couldn't, I had other things, but I would make sure my assistant went, one of my assistants went, or one of my department managers, at least someone in a position to make a decision of hiring would meet this person. And I'm not saying, look at me, I'm just saying that was a learning that I had to learn over time. And that's where it starts, with encouraging your employees. If you can't even take a moment to take their application, how's it going to be when they're on staff, when they have a problem? Are you going to take your time to go see them? So our actions are very impactful. And once we realize that how you show up can encourage people in very positive ways, and it could also encourage them in negative ways. And then when you see those negative behaviors, you're like, well, that's weird. Why are they doing that? And it's like, well, where's the example set? Who's leading? Who's showing them how to interact with the world? And so I think it's very important is how we show up can encourage people, and it does.
Absolutely. And while I'm still on, before I get taken off, I've got some comments, want to catch up. Carrie says Jason's right with everyone getting a price and not how we are supposed to have with just 1 through 3rd place. Charles comes back with believe in the person you are becoming. You have the strength and potential to achieve greatness within you. So true. Dave comes back with the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Eleanor Roosevelt. So true. Charles comes back. Just one small positive thought in the morning can change your whole day. Dalai Lama. And employee engagement. Companies with high levels of employee recognition and encouragement see a 14% increase in productivity. And resilience. Research indicates that people who feel encouraged are 60% more likely to bounce back from setbacks. Mental health positive reinforcement can reduce anxiety and depression symptoms by up to 30%. Interesting, according to various studies. Carrie says, my dad was really strict when I was growing up. I had to get that negative talk out of my head was the hardest thing to do. And also I had been living in the past. Didn't see how it affected me until someone told me to stop. And you know, it just shows you how many influences, and in today's world, things have even multiplied more with social media. You know, what I loved about growing up is there was a lot of quiet. There's a lot of time alone. There was a lot of time being outside with just yourself and nature. And before I turn over to Catherine, I think one of the key elements is count your blessings. Gratitude and context make such a difference. What you worry about is small compared to other things that you may one day worry about. And you wish you had those old challenges. And you got to give yourself credit for always being a work in progress. So with that said, and sometimes I think this machine tells me when I need to stop talking by taking me out an automatic.
That's really funny. Well, I do believe that as you were talking about, Don, as far as being outside and having time alone, I think it's so useful to have quiet time to reflect and really understand what it is, you know, each of us wants to accomplish individually, what, as Jason was talking about, what our purpose is, because that makes the world of difference in our intention and how we move forward in a day, and how we show up, not only for ourselves, but for other people. And Jason, when you were talking about the manager missing the opportunity, right, with the gal that wanted to give her application, what came to mind was the do-it-yourself customer service that so many companies are offering these days. And I was tangled up with that just within the last few days. And I'm like, you know, it really makes me think about, do I want to keep paying for this subscription if I can't get anybody to help me, you know, figure this out, right? To accomplish what it is that I need to do to make that subscription work for me. And I'm like, wow, okay. So that comes right in with, you know, emotional intelligence and how we all want to engage with each other. And I believe that it does take some evaluation and some time for reflection to really determine how we want to show up.
Great point, Catherine. Charles.
Yeah, speaking of how we want to show up, I come back to what Jason talked about with the example of the young girl that, or the teenager, I guess it was, Jason, that came in to apply for a job. So from my perspective as an HR professional, she is a candidate, right? And that company just gave that candidate a terrible candidate experience. And the best companies put a lot of time and thought into candidate experience long before people have any idea that they're a candidate. Companies like, well, I don't know what company you were working for at the time, Jason, maybe it was the manager, but even McDonald's. I mean, McDonald's is notorious for marketing to kids and not marketing to parents. But if you look at companies like Microsoft, Apple, Nike, they are acutely aware that anybody that they interact with could someday be a customer. Someone could convert from Android to Apple on their mobile device, and immediately they become an Apple customer. And it reminds me, about it's a long way down for leaders when they fall, and they have to remember they're going to meet people on the way down that they're going to also meet on the way up. And treating people with respect and encouragement is really, really important. But this is something that we dealt a lot with from a candidate experience perspective, dealt a lot with in Asia, because in Asia, we've got high growth markets for the last several decades and high volume recruitment. And we were really struggled to retain candidates after they had accepted job offers in the tech industry across Asia. And so we were coming up with all sorts of unique ways to court candidates. And the last thing we would ever do is we would say no to a candidate. Even in my last company, which was not high volume, fairly low volume, a real focus on quality because we were hiring teachers, we really would go out of our way as much as possible to give candidates feedback if they were unsuccessful, because we're well aware that they might come back in 5 years and be a successful candidate, and we really want them to be a friend of the organization.
Yeah, I think those points are so valuable, and it just brings to mind, why not treat everybody as if somebody else showed more interest in them and was willing to give them something more before that happens?
Yeah.
Usually it's too late to change sides. If you've been something to somebody for so long, it's hard just the next day say, okay, I'm going to do this now. The damage or the benefit's already been provided. And the key is, if you had a hard time getting a job or been mistreated on an interview, you are more sensitive to other people. When I used to interview people, I used to always think, well, this gal is somebody's daughter, just like I have a daughter. How would I want them to be treated? And I always looked at desire as the number one element. How bad does somebody want this? How bad does someone need this? And how come they haven't gotten it? And there's usually something superficial. It could have been their education level. It could have been where they came from. It could have been a million things, but it had nothing to do with the job responsibilities. And someone who's willing to learn and change is so important. And when you have that, you have fertile ground for encouragement, because you're going to dedicate a lot of time and interest. And you may not be able to retain somebody, but you might have put somebody on the right road, that they deserve to be on. And I was always encouraging people, if you can do better and you can find something that fits you better, I'll help you.
Mhm.
The last thing I want to do is I'll give you some more money, because all you're doing is bribing and buying, instead of really enticing people to say, hey, I like the culture. That's one thing you can develop. You may not be able to compete with Microsoft or anybody who has a ton of money, but someone could say, I could do better financially, but I couldn't do better personally or professionally. And people, I'm safe, I'm secure. I know someone cares about me. The whole saying, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care, is so valid. And you feel proud of yourself, because I never looked at the bottom line as much as I looked at the organization, because numbers go up and down. But when you've got a solid group that will go to war for you and look forward to it, that's something that you can't put a price on, and what comes around goes around. I was never a big guy on parking lot spaces with names on it, or, having special privileges. I would encourage everybody that everybody's a human here. Everybody has needs and everybody has feelings. Let's do our best to make this the best 8 hours of their day, because they're giving us the best 8 hours of their day. What do we give them in return? And what you put in usually is what you get out. So round the horn real quick, Dave.
Yeah, I think whenever some words that we've thrown out here are caring, marketing, leadership, back to encouragement. But what I think if I can encapsulate what I've heard from the last round here, is intentional. intentional caring, intentional marketing, the leadership, having the intent, planning it out, not just, well, I'm going to wing it when the girl comes in for her application. No, I want to have an intention behind what is it I want to convey, whether it's Apple or Microsoft, the intention of what they expect from their actions. And if you have the right intent, you get the right encouragement for your future customers, friends, family, whatever it is out of them, because you're intentional with your words, your actions, and that will have an effect long-term positively, hopefully.
Yeah, very strong points. Jason.
And just to loop back real quick to Charles's point, yeah, the end of that story, my wife actually was with me, and then the story is afterwards we were talking about like, well, that was just a missed opportunity, and then I said, at the very least, that's a customer. You just gave a bad customer experience. Not even about, well, she's just looking for a job. She's just a candidate. She's not just a candidate, and just a candidate's a horrible thing, first of all. But the second thing is that she's a customer. And she's going to go tell her parents what happened. She's going to tell their friends and stuff like that. So that's about that being, today's point of being intentional, knowing what your actions have, positive and negative, But encouragement is so important. You live it and meet people where they're at. I think that's what I want to end with, is meeting people where they're at. Because if you're trying to support somebody and they can't hear you, you're wasting their time and it might have a negative effect. So if someone just needs someone to sit with them and just be that, to Don's point, that safe place, then that's how you can encourage somebody. Just be there for them, and that's the key, is meeting people where they're at. And your encouragement will go so much further if you do that. And Don's frozen smiling.
Don is frozen, right? And so what's interesting, I love what you're talking about, Jason, because I believe that, it leads me to think of emotional safety. And when people don't feel safe, they don't feel welcomed, then the encouragement can actually just fall on deaf ears. And so what's the point of that, right? And I'm not saying to be false about it, right? But genuine, creating an emotionally safe culture or an environment is huge. And when we think about, just the example that you were talking about at the restaurant, and that's a small environment. And when you extrapolate that out, how many times, it's like, wow, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I think it's just something to think about.
Great point, even though I missed the first half of it.
Yeah, I think what I'd want to end with is 2 points. One of them is that how encouragement actually supports people to take risks. And when you are actually providing encouragement to people, you're encouraging them to step outside their comfort zone and to take, not impulsive, but calculated risks. And that actually points them towards personal growth. And I think that is a really great side of encouragement. And the other thing about encouragement, we've talked a lot about being encouraged by people in the past and different experiences that we've had. But also when we encourage people, we leave a legacy of positivity for the future generation. And when we are demonstrating acts of encouragement, whether they're small random acts of kindness or they're big gestures, those acts of encouragement can inspire future generations to create a lasting culture of support and positivity within families, communities, within organizations. And hopefully all of this can point us towards being well and building resilience.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable insights and sharing, and collective encouragement goes a long way too. So it's not just, starts with you and someone else, and then continues to build around the circle. We've got Omar here at the last minute. Always good to see you. Omar was with us last week. Omar is putting together a music show, a singing show coming up. And he's got Leslie Flowers is going to be one of the singers. I'm actually one of the judges since I don't know how to sing. and encouraging people by not being involved in that part of it. Charles comes back with a quick comment. Social support individuals with strong encouragement networks report 50% higher levels of life satisfaction. Well, it's kind of obvious that everything we're talking about, encouragement has significant value. It's something we can apply all the time. And sometimes we're pretty stingy with our compliments. You know, I mean, I see just a kind word that's deserved. Every time I do a show, my wife says, well, have fun, good luck, and I always come back and say, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Right.
We lost them.
Well, I think we're right at the hour anyway.
I think we're at the hour. It's exactly midnight in Hong Kong.
Yep, just turned 12 here in the East Coast. So
Right.
I guess with that, I would say thank you for everybody showing up, and kind of not to take it over, but appreciate Catherine and Charles and Jason. I always have a fun time with these, as I know Don does, and have a great week.
Hope you all have an encouraging day and weekend.
And I encourage you to have fun.
Absolutely. Definitely have fun.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Let's see. How do I get out of here? Here we are.